Hello, everyone, and thank you all for joining us for today's webinar, co-hosted with Screen Australia on the Australian government's brand new Games Expansion Pack Fund. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the many lands upon which we are all joining from today. At my end, I recognise the Darug people as the traditional custodians of the land upon which I was born, grew up, and am actually speaking from today. I pay respects to elders past and present and to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. My name's Ben Au, and I'm the Director of Policy and Government Affairs at the Interactive Games and Entertainment Association, or IGEA, which represents the Australian video games industry. We extend the warmest of welcomes to everyone who has taken the time to join us, including many of our members who I know are here today. We're here to talk about something incredibly exciting, and that is the return, after an absence of many years, of direct federal screen funding for Australian video games. As we all know, Australia makes amazing games. However, it hasn't always been an easy journey for Australian devs for several reasons, including limited options for government support. And while we've been grateful for the funding and support provided by many states and territories, the absence of a federal games fund over the past few years has been felt. However, there have been some seismic shifts recently. Last year, as a part of the budget and as one of the centerpieces of the new digital economy strategy, the Australian government announced a massively significant 30% digital games tax offset, which we'll call the DGTO, that is set to commence on 1 July this year. And just on this, we understand that exposure draft legislation for the tax offset is imminent, but not yet released, so we won't be talking about it too much today. Either in anticipation of or in response to this major Commonwealth reform, the South Australian, Victorian, New South Wales and Queensland governments have also launched complementary state game development rebates too. And then last week, at the Sydney studio of our member, Not Doppler, we joined Screen Australia and the Federal Arts Minister, Paul Fletcher, for their announcement of the new Games Expansion Pack Fund. As I'm just a warm-up act, I won't talk too much about the fund now, except to say that for years, we've advocated very strongly for both direct funding and a tax offset. They work in different ways, different objectives, and they target different parts of the sector, but they're designed to work together and are absolutely essential for delivering the I'm going to give everyone a wave. Jens is the Director of Industry and Member Relations at IGEA, and Jens's work focuses on building up the local game development industry here in Australia, and he'll keep things moving along this afternoon. We're also fortunate to have Lee Namo from Screen Australia, which you will all know is the Australian government's screen funding body that we have to thank for the fund. Lee's the head of online production investment there, and his team will be administering the fund. Also with us today, although only in text form, is Tim Phillips, who has been assisting Screen Australia with this fund. Some of the veterans here may recall that the last time Australia had a federal games fund, it was run by none other than Tim. So we're very glad to have him here today, dispensing wisdom in the chat. And as you can also see, we have some wonderful Aslan interpreters with us this afternoon too. That's it for me. So without further ado, I will now pass things on to Jens.
Pass over to Lee. We'll then go through the guidelines and then make himself available for some Q&A, just some housekeeping rules. Essentially, just one rule. If you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A function. You'll see that at the bottom right of Zoom. So please, if you have any questions, put in there and not in the chat. The advantage of that is that we have a complete overview of the questions that you have asked, whereas they are somewhat easy to miss in the chat. If there's an ongoing conversation, that question might move up and there is a good chance we're going to miss it. So put your questions in there. And we're going to answer them once Lee has given you an overview of the guidelines. So Lee, we're going to head over to you now, and then we're going to go straight to Q&A.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jens. Thanks, Ben. Thanks, IGEA, for having me here today. And thank you all for joining. This is being recorded, so if you do miss any of it, it will be up on the Screen Australia Games Expansion Pack Guidelines site, which we can put a link to if you haven't seen that already. Yes, as Ben and Jens said, I'm the head of online at Screen Australia. This fund is going to be looked after by myself and my team and some external assessors as well. But let me talk you through the guidelines a little bit, and then we can jump into Q&A. It's open right now, so applications are open now until the 28th of April for this first round, and funding decisions will be made and allocated this financial year. It may take a little while after that for contracting to happen, but we're intending to make a significant number of decisions this financial year on that first round. It is aimed at games that aren't eligible for the DGTO, so with a budget under $500,000. That's kind of where we're positioning, as Ben said, to kind of bridge that gap in funding for those smaller and medium-sized studios and developers. You can apply for up to $150,000 per application. That application can cover one or more games. Applications for multiple games would still need to come under that total threshold of $150,000. So that's kind of where we're positioning the funding. It's in the form of a grant, so it's not recoupable. That money then goes to you, becomes your money. How nice. You must be a company to apply. That's something that we have put in place for this round of funding. We may look at that, in subsequent rounds and look to adjust that. But as it is aimed at small companies and studios rather than sole traders, that's where we've positioned this fund at the moment. On the fund coming back as well, our plan currently is that this first round, as I said, closes end of April, but we will open a second round that will most likely be rolling and ongoing later in the year around September. So keep your eye out for announcements around that. And that's when we can look to implement any changes in the fund as well. In terms of what you apply with, what we're looking for, you apply with ideally a playable demo of the game that you're developing. You can apply with a trailer, but obviously a playable demo is going to be more beneficial for us to get a sense of what the game is. We also look at a development plan, a finance plan and budget, marketing and release plan, and crucially a video pitch. And I just want to talk about that video pitch for a second, because it is something that across the board of Screen Australia applicants don't like, but we love those video pitches. And I'll tell you why they're so useful for us and why we like them. It's really, we're not going to get a chance to sit down with everybody and hear your pitch for your game or your project, over a cup of coffee or a proper pitch for it and meet you face to face and hear that passion and that excitement from you. The video pitch is your chance to give us that passion, give us that excitement, give us that sense of why this project is important to you in video form, so that not just me, but anyone else assessing your application can get a sense of that. So while I encourage people not to spend money on those video pitches, because we don't want you doing that, please do have a think about it, put some thought and time and effort into what that pitch looks like and how to best position your game, or games in video form. And you can get creative with that as well. It doesn't need to always be a straight pitch to camera. We've had people pitching with written signs or all sorts of different ways to pitch. Cool, I think I've sold that enough. In terms of the process from there, once you apply, obviously it goes to assessment. The assessment criteria is all up in the guidelines, but just to unpack that for a minute, we look at the creative and entertainment value of your game or games, the viability of the budget, the development and finance plans, the marketing and release plan, and then the potential to build your business. And that's really what the purpose of this fund is there for, is to build businesses and hopefully take you from that small or medium stage to a bigger stage down the track, help you accelerate that transition. As I said earlier, assessing will be done by a combination of Screen Australia internal staff and external assessors. On that note, We do currently have a job ad out for a games investment manager who will report into me. I think Molly might be able, someone will be able to put that in the chat. Thank you, Molly. That's a position based either in Sydney or Melbourne. Have a look at the job ad if you're interested in coming and working for, the dark side, as we call it, for Screen Australia. Currently open for a 12-month contract, but that may extend as hopefully the fund will extend, which is our ideal scenario. I think I've just kind of said all of that I can about the guidelines. That's all information. Most of the information is available on the website. What I really want to get into today is stuff that isn't there and help answer some questions. So Jens, I'm going to throw back to you to throw some questions at me, if that's okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lee. Just with regards to the questions, you had an opportunity to submit questions before this webinar, and you certainly took advantage of that. So we received a bunch of questions. If we can't answer all of them, we will facilitate introductions and make sure to follow up. So just in case your question doesn't get answered today, we'll look after it. So like I said before, viewers had an opportunity to submit questions beforehand, and a lot of them revolved around legibility. So maybe let's start with that one. So one of the questions we had was, speaking of expansion packs, would a discrete piece of downloadable content, DLC, for a PC or console game qualify for this funding if it costs $500,000 or less? As we all know, for premium titles, DLC can be a crucial component in sales longevity in the same way that live ops is for games as a service. So is DLC covered in this?
Short answer, yes. I do want to stress something that we talk about a lot at Screen Australia, the difference between being eligible and competitive, and really encourage you, if your project is eligible, think about how you can be competitive, strategic with that application, and pull that back to that assessment criteria, right? And when I think about DLC, think about how is that going to increase the scale and sustainability of the applicant in the long term. So certainly not saying it's not something we'll look at. We will definitely look at DLC, and I would, if that's part of your plan, by all means apply. But just know that we will most likely be preferencing original titles and really examining applications around DLC for the longer term ramifications.
Yeah, thank you, Leah. There were some more questions regarding that eligibility. So people were asking, for example, are physical escape rooms legible? Are VR titles legible? And is there support for serious games?
No, yes. So unfortunately, physical escape rooms is not something that this funding is aimed at. We are Screen Australia. We're looking to support digital games across a variety of platforms. So sorry, but your escape room will have to seek funding elsewhere. The second one was VR. Yes, certainly. I mean, we do assess and have funded quite a few VR projects in the scripted narrative space. Obviously, games is different, but a question that comes up time and again about VR is around audience. So again, encouraging you to be strategic, really focus on that marketing and release plan. How is this VR project going to reach an audience and hook them in? And then the third one was around serious games. Was that the...
Yeah, that's exactly right. Serious games, but also games revolving around cultural heritage, for example, who have a degree of, cultural merit.
Yeah, I mean, I would pull that back to the creative side of it, what we're assessing. Then, certainly eligible, certainly something we'd look at. Something that kind of may cover off a few questions or something to think about is whenever Screen Australia does fund something, particularly in a form like this, where we are going to be funding a lot of titles in this first round, we look at that slate and how we can have quite a diverse slate. And by diverse, I mean different genres, different platforms, reaching different audiences. So absolutely, it would be great to come out with an announcement and say we're funding, all sorts of different genres of games that have different angles on creativity.
Great, thank you. I mean, just to elaborate a bit more, because I got another question here that sort of aims or goes in that direction. Is there consideration for artistic merit, cultural contribution, and other ways in which a funded project can act as a financial loss leader to further the studio's profile of goodwill?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, as I say, the creative and entertainment value is of merit. I guess I would still just encourage you to make sure you consider that marketing and release plan. Doesn't have to have a monetary tie into it. I appreciate that things can be a loss leader or a marketing element for a company. But how is that going to reach that audience, I guess, would be the question we'd be asking and interrogating.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lee. Look, some other questions we had as well with regards to eligibility is sort of the threshold which you have to cross. So, we got a question, for example, that's somewhat emblematic of that is, as a developer with experience in Unity development and game jams, but only recently has started working in the games industry and doesn't really have proper release titles yet, do I count as grassroots or first timer or emerging? Or am I eligible? Do I cross that threshold?
I mean, firstly, I wouldn't get too hung up on the classification of where you sit. That's not a necessarily make or break part of an application, but there is actually some definitions of that in the application form. If you've gotten to that stage, we define, I think, grassroots. I might be getting this wrong, but it says, one game or fewer that's been released. Anyway, it's there above where you select your experience level. But that's for us to get a sense of where you place yourself in your career. So, like I said, I wouldn't get too concerned about that classification.
Okay, great. Look, some more questions with regards to eligibility, and then we're going to also jump to the Q&A section here. But I found this one quite interesting because it just goes to show how niche some of those things can be. So my question is basically for more clarification of what is considered games not intended for supply to the general public. For example, a game to be used by a company for training purposes or by an institution, and so on. We would be looking at the creation of games or game experiences targeting licenses to arcades that then offer them to the general public. So the number of locations I would not consider to be small. There would be hundreds, if not thousands, of potential venues nationally, internationally, but we're not using traditional direct-to-public access platforms such as Steam, for example. It's a bit of an exotic case. So what do you reckon?
Yes, and I love how specific we're getting here. That is quite specific. Look, I think the overall answer to that is that it does sound like it's eligible, as long as we're talking about, I guess, to be super specific, screen-based games. If we're talking about arcades, I'm making a differentiation between screen-based games and, I don't know, whack-a-mole or boxing simulators that you punch or whatever that may be. Carnival type games, I don't know. So as long as they're screen-based, I think there's eligibility there. I think, again, it will come down to competitiveness and thinking strategically about, the market and how that will access an audience. But yeah, I did see that question come through. It's interesting. Yes, so to the question of eligibility, yes.
Yeah, just a bit of heads up what will come your way. Let's have a look at the Q&A section here as well. James has been fairly active in this right from the start, and he's asking, would we be better off pitching a new project or a current project that would benefit from additional funding to reach completion?
I guess hard to answer not knowing too much about the projects, but think about this as a fund to get projects out to market. So we do want to take projects through to completion and delivery and, to be able to be accessed by the public. So whichever of your projects meets that criteria, maybe you want to apply with both. And, like I said earlier, these applications are eligible for one or multiple games. And we'd appreciate that games may be at different stages of their development cycle.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So James is also asking, if an application isn't accepted, can you reapply for the next round for the same project?
Yes, we do tend to have a two-strike policy at Screen Australia. So if you're applying with the same project to the same fund and you're rejected twice, that's when we say, thank you, no thank you again. But yes, essentially you can apply to the second iteration or the second round of the fund with that same project.
Okay, great. Thank you. Tom's asking, I work for Strange Animals, a digital design studio. Almost all our animals are avid gamers. Interesting staffing policy. Is there an opportunity for a design studio to collaborate with game studios and provide required services as part of this initiative?
So let me just unpack that question a bit. I'm not quite sure I understand. Yeah, and sorry, can you kind of repeat that?
Yeah, so Tom is working for digital design studio, which I would assume isn't, I guess they wouldn't consider themselves as a sort of classic game development studio, but I think the question is there opportunity for us as a design studio to collaborate with a game studio and provide required services as part of this funding?
Gotcha. I think where you might be going with this is, are you able to apply just as a design studio? And I guess I would pull it back to, you need to apply with a project, a game or games that is intending to go to market to be released. So if it's just applying for funding to offer services to games companies, I don't think that's eligible. Hopefully I'm understanding that right. And I will say this applies not just to this question, but if anyone does have questions that we don't get to today, or you want to have a conversation about your project, so happy for you to email through games@screenaustralia.gov.au. Hopefully someone can pop that in the Q&A or the chat if it's not there already, games@screenaustralia.gov.au. That will get to me and to my team, and we can go into more detail on things like this. But I think if I'm understanding the question correctly, the answer is probably not.
All right, well, fair enough too. There's a question here from Robert, and this is also one that we've received in similar form before this webinar. Are there specific definitions related to crime, cruelty, violence, sexual depictions, and drug use? Does this instantly exclude games with generalized conflict, combat, and so on? And again, that was very similar to a question we've received in writing. There was someone making a game where I believe you chop someone's limbs off and then you could see blood. And so, where do you draw the line?
Yeah, as very good questions. I guess what we consider to be ineligible for this fund are games that, in our opinion, may have difficulties receiving an Australian classification. So we put it back on you to assess whether you think that is something that will be the case for your game or games. If you think it's going to have difficulty getting a classification, I'd encourage you to look at projects that maybe have fallen into that category in the past. Yeah, I'm happy to unpack this one a bit more offline because it's a bit of a tricky one, but yeah, we want to fund games that will get a classification, and in our reasonable opinion and yours.
From someone, which again, we've received in very similar form in writing as well. Namely, are there any online templates, resources for the development plan required of the funding? And just looking at some of the questions here that we've received in writing, I'm an indie dev, I don't have much experience. How do I get started? Are there any examples out there for budgets or marketing plans? Do you have any recommended templates of any of the requested material, such as development financing, marketing release plan, and so on? So that question figured very prominently in the questions as well. What do I actually hand in, and is there some guidance?
What do you want from me, Screen Australia? Tell me what you want. I understand. So partly yes, there is a finance plan template on the guidelines page, which we would encourage you to use. You will need to use that for your finance plan and budget. So that's kind of the two documents wrapped up in one. Simply speaking, finance plan is where the money is coming from, the budget's how you're going to spend that money, and they're in the one document, the one spreadsheet on different tabs. Please use that for your application. So that's that ticked. In terms of the other elements that we're looking for, the answer is no. There aren't templates that we provide for things like the development plan, the marketing and release plan. The reason is every project is different. We want you to think about your project from your point of view and think about how you're going to market that. And if we start providing templates for those, we're going to start getting very similar answers. And we put that back on you to think about the best way to articulate that marketing and release plan. What I can tell you on that is be as detailed as you can. Detail is your friend in the case of a marketing and release plan. And in terms of the development plan, think about the milestones, think about the life cycle, the steps in your game, and put them into a document for us. I appreciate that's not potentially super helpful for you, but would also add, there's a differentiation here between Screen Australia's role and making sure that we're not giving you all the answers to then assess those answers. So it's our role in this process to assess those applications rather than to, give out the materials that you need for those applications. But plenty of people in the industry are hopefully very generous and happy to assist or provide guidance, especially if they've been there before and can provide guidance to newer creators. Similarly, happy to have a chat with you if you're feeling really lost about your application and feeling like you just don't know what we're asking for. Please reach out and we'll see what kind of answers we can give.
To talk to people who've done this before, have experience there. I mean, the Australian industry, generally speaking, is always very generous with their time. So, reach out to your networks and see how far there's an opportunity for them to guide you in this. We have a question here from Robert, and one again that we've received in writing as well. And I do also see it popping up a couple of times here in the chat. Can we get some clarification surrounding the required first milestone close of contracting? What that requires, and just to elaborate on that, Jasper is asking, what are the milestone timeframes? Weekly, monthly, quarterly? Are the milestones set by the studios or by Screen Australia? What's going on?
Great, let's talk milestones. Close of contracting, to be clear on that, is when both parties have signed that contract. So closing the contract, executing the contract, whatever term you give it. It's when the contract is signed, and that's typically linked to that first drawdown or payment. There may be other elements that we need for that contract to be executed, but that will be something that myself or your investment manager will talk through with you when that contract comes to you. So the close of contracting is typically your first milestone. Your last milestone is delivery. So when we get all of the elements in that contract that say you've delivered that game, you've made what we funded you to make. Then we're asking you to nominate an appropriate middle milestone. We don't need more than 3 necessarily, but we're putting that back on you because, as I said earlier, every game is different, every project is different. What might be an appropriate middle milestone for that second round of money to come to you? You tell us, essentially, and we can have that conversation slash friendly negotiation at when we're starting to look at a contract once we've approved funding.
Okay, great. Thank you. Look, I'm just going to jump back to some of the previously submitted questions here in writing, because I think some of them are pretty relevant. And I think I've seen one of them pop up in the chat as well. And one of them is, or again, numerous questions related to that. What's the relationship between this fund and state-based funding? For example, if I get some money from, say, Screen Queensland or Screen Victoria, am I eligible for this? Can I essentially double dip?
Yeah, absolutely. It's certainly not essential. We are expecting and open to funding projects where Screen Australia's funding is potentially 100% of the finance plan, but we also welcome projects where there's other funding, and that can make you more competitive if we're seeing that Screen Australia aren't bearing 100% of the load of your budget. Would encourage you to go to your local state funding body if they provide eligible funding for games. And in that finance plan template, there's an option to click when you list a source of funding, whether it's confirmed or pending. So we appreciate that there's different milestones and different timings and schedules with all sorts of funding and rounds closing and opening here, there, and everywhere. So you bring your application into us in the state it's in, be as honest as you can be. Particularly around whether funding is confirmed or pending, and we'll assess based on that. But it's a very common practice in projects that Screen Australia is typically funding, that there's finance plans with state funding available, and hope to work closely with many of the states on projects that we're funding.
No restriction for funding based on location within Australia. So someone here is saying, my business partner and I, we work remotely between WA and Victoria. Are we still eligible? Yeah,
absolutely. As long as it is within Australia, then totally worth Screen Australia and fund all over the country.
Excellent. Can sole traders get involved?
At this stage, you do need to be a company to be eligible. So that, as I said, that is something we are going to look at for the second round, but we do require you to be an incorporated company to apply. And just to unpack the reasoning behind that for a second, it is because we are aiming initially at studios, at companies, and this is production funding, which, production/development funding to get projects made. Yeah, we're getting that question a lot. I'm going to be honest. It is something we're going to look really closely at for the next round, and it may be changed. But right now, in order to be eligible, we need to be incorporated.
Very cool, thank you. One more question regarding eligibility from the pre-submitted questions. I'm going to go to the live Q&A section again. Regarding the minimum 90%, 10% split between development expenditure and marketing activities, does the fund fully exclude any non-Australian development, including supplementary non-marketing support, such as porting, QA testing, and play testing? In particular, can the budget be used for international consultancy or mentorship for Australian developers where the expertise is difficult or impossible to find locally?
So, broadly speaking, we need to form an opinion that a project is sufficiently Australian. Overseas expenditure doesn't exclude or doesn't make you ineligible, but we are going to preference projects that are spending money onshore in Australia. I guess that 90-10% split, if there are other parties in the finance plan, makes it easier to justify maybe other money is going to a larger percentage split offshore, as long as Screen Australia is confident that 90% of our funding is going towards the development of the game. This might be one to have a chat with offline if you do have more questions around that, because I appreciate that it's a tricky line to tread. But essentially, if you think about this fund, Screen Australia's funding should be going to activities that are taking place onshore, retaining, as always, the option to be flexible, appreciative of your point around, expertise that may not be in Australia at this point. Hopefully that isn't the case, in many cases.
All right, great. Well, let's jump back to the live Q&A here. Adrian is asking, what are the limits on spending the grant money? What can the grant not be spent on?
I think a little bit of that was answered just then in terms of in the guidelines, we do talk about 90% of the funding needs to be used for the development of that game, and then 10% can be used for marketing, travel, offshore expenses that may promote the game. Other than that, it needs to be, we can't fund retroactively, so it needs to be things that are yet to happen. But certainly I've had a few conversations with people already about the question of, can I pay myself as the person working on the game? Absolutely, as long as it is work on the game and not for other business activities, then by all means, and it would encourage that.
Yeah, great for touching on that, because that's again a question that we've received a couple of times. Can I actually pay myself? So yes, you can.
Yeah.
Okay.
Every single time I got funding, my business partner and I turned to each other at the end of the project and went, let's put more for ourselves in the budget next time, because we worked really hard on this. Not trying to rip anyone off, but just to make sure that we're paid for the work that we're done. And I encourage that in your budgets and your plans. Good. That's,
it's important in terms of so Ian McManus is asking, if it's a small team and someone is handling multiple roles, for example, designer, producer, are those best to be split out separately in the budget? For example, X% on one role, Y% on the other role.
Good question. I might throw over to Tim Phillips to answer that one if that's in the chat, and then we can all see Tim's answer. I think that's how it works, right? We can all see questions that are answered in the Q&A.
Yes, absolutely. And Tim is furiously typing away. He's already answered 26 questions.
Oh my
gosh, this is a question from Neil that touches upon a question that I asked earlier with regards to DLC. Neil is asking, does this grant include live ops for an existing game?
Yeah, I think that's in our guidelines that we acknowledge that, and it certainly can. Let me just double check where we list that. I'm going to say yes. I'm going to take the rest of it on notice and give you a more detailed answer in a second. Yeah, they're eligible. It's in there. Just going to control F on my own guidelines. Can I admit to that?
All right, excellent. Look, another question that we got a lot in writing was regards to budget and budget changing. So just going to read out one here that kind of reflects the other one, or includes the other questions as well. What would happen if a project started below a $500,000 budget, receives the grant, and then the costs blow out? We exceed the original budget. This could happen for a variety of reasons: delays in development, wanting to expand scope, or an opportunity for further investment from a third party.
Yeah. Good question, and one that I've had a few conversations about already. The honest answer is we are aiming this fund at games that are under that $500,000 threshold. As I said earlier, we don't want to overlap with the DGTO when it comes out. But we're also aware that things do change, and we don't want to put a cap on ambition. I guess we just want to get a sense that it is a natural ambition rather than, you know, to my point earlier, we want you to come in with as honest an application as you can, because this isn't aimed at bigger games that are certainly going to, you know, cross that threshold. If it happens, you know, let's have a conversation and let's work it out, because it might be a really good case scenario for all of us. Your game has exploded and gone really well, and you know, we all get to share in that success. So certainly not going to put that cap on ambition, but we're also not going to aim for it either.
Okay, great. Look, we have a question in the live Q&A that is related to the paying yourself question. So Meredith is asking, you mentioned paying yourself as long as it's working on the game, but not for other business activities. Can you clarify on that? Does that mean that business development, for example, or pitching would not be included or approved in the budget? Is there room for upskilling business skills through mentorship and similar as part of the project's development?
I think we would try and allocate that in that 10% of the budget that's used for other activities not around the game. I appreciate it's a bit of a blurred line. Happy to have a conversation with you about it, but really what this fund is there for is for the funding of the development of the games. And then, you know, we can happy to that 10% to allocate to the marketing and the, you know, to travel and things like that, and other business development. So yeah, I think I'd try and draw that line at 90-10%, but happy to have a conversation if it's something that you feel, you know, if that's going to make your game feel ineligible, let's have a chat about it and see where we can get to.
Yeah, excellent. Speaking of marketing, Jesper is asking, how free choice is the marketing? Does the studio decide where it's going to be spent, or does Screen Australia have a say in that? Also with events and showcases, do they need to be within Australia, or are international showcases okay as well? For example, Tokyo Game Show, or you know, any of these other international events, Gamescom and so on.
Yeah, to the first part of the question, that's certainly something that we put on you. We will assess whether that feels like an appropriate marketing and release strategy, but we won't say, no, don't do that, yes, do this. We may have an opinion on that, but it's up to you as to how you market and release that game, and we will assess that. And if we feel like it's you know, it makes sense within the context of the application, then that will be something that we would most likely approve. To the second part, yes, they can be offshore, but again, I'd pull back that 90-10%, just making sure that, you know, the majority of this money is spent onshore in Australia on the development of the game itself. All games.
All games. Hate to put you on the spot here, but we do have someone who's a bit confused in the Q&A who's saying, hey, Lee said that VR arcade type games could be legible where the studio would license it out, but on the Screen Australia website, it says they're not.
I think they might be referring to, let me just check, and I hope I've got this right. We do talk about, oh, here we go. XR projects which are not a game shouldn't apply to this fund. They should apply to online production funding. So to unpack that a bit, we draw that delineation currently through online production funding, which is a fund that me and my team manage. You can apply for a VR, XR scripted narrative project. That's been something that's been eligible and been funded for a while. That's where those kind of projects should go. If you have a VR game, you should come to the Games Expansion Pack Fund. So I think that might be where the confusion's coming from. Let me know if I've answered that properly, because I certainly would repeat that VR projects are eligible for the Games Expansion Pack funding as long as they're a game.
Sure. And look, you know, again, if there's anything that you need to sort out in detail, you can always reach out and discuss that with Lee as well. All right, so we still have a bunch of other questions here, about 30. Paulina is asking, are there any other requirements of funding? For example, something other than the Screen Australia credits?
I'm not quite sure I understand, sorry, in terms of like...
I guess it's like, you know, normally, so you'd, the support of Screen Australia would have to be acknowledged in the credits. Is there anything other than, you know, are there any other requirements in that respect?
Yes, we will get to that kind of in the contracting phase, I guess, but it's not going to be anything that I feel like will inhibit, the right word I want to use there, the development of this game or your business operations. Hopefully it's yet. But you're right, we do require a credit, and that's something that we tend to have. We have a credits policy. We can negotiate those credits as well because we acknowledge that projects are different. For example, currently in the other half of my job, funding a lot of projects on TikTok, and it's not really great for a TikTok audience to have a Screen Australia logo take up a couple of seconds of their 60 seconds on screen. So those kind of things we can have a conversation about and negotiate around credits. In terms of other things, I mean, nothing onerous is coming to mind, but Tim, you jump in if you feel like I've missed something that would be a requirement. You know, delivering the game is the main one, making sure that, you know, what we fund you for is achieved. Hopefully you knew that already.
Look, we have some questions here about in-kind contributions. And again, that's something figured somewhat prominently in the written submissions as well. So are in-kind applicant contributions to date, for example, development time, are they relevant? I.e., should those be listed in the finance plan as an in-kind contribution that has occurred, or only ones that happened after milestone 1?
Yeah, so hopefully this simplifies things. We did have a think about this and you know, have a, I guess, a line that we can draw that's hopefully helpful. Acknowledging this may not be the case with other agencies or other funding bodies, but this is for the purposes of this funding where how we're defining in kind. It would need to be in the budget if it's actual money that has been paid. For example, if you have been working on this game for a few years and have paid yourself a wage and it's been money that's gone into your account, that would be in-kind contributions that you can put into your finance plan and budget. If it's just around the hours and labor, that's where we would draw the line and say that doesn't need to be in the finance plan and budget. And hopefully that helps you very simply fill out those forms and you know, accurately represent the money in your budget.
Excellent. Look, some of the questions that we received before the webinar relate to the relationships that applicants might have with publishers. You know, one of them is asking, we plan to approach publishers near the end of the year seeking marketing support. Will this affect our eligibility for the grant? Also, do you think the grant will make us less appealing to a publisher?
The second part of the question, I would say almost certainly not. I would really hope it makes you more appealing to a publisher that you've had financial support and funding and gotten, you know, convinced Screen Australia that this game is worthy of support. That would hopefully help to convince a publisher to come on board. To the first part, hopefully this answers the question that, again, pulling back to this is funding to get games to market. Just to get them to a stage to pitch to a publisher isn't going to meet our, you know, eligibility around getting the game released. Maybe that it's releasing to early access or something like that, that then may convince a publisher to come on board, or maybe used to try and broker that relationship. As long as there was some kind of access for the general public for this game, all games, it would be eligible. Hopefully that answers your question.
All right, thank you. Just going back to the Q&A chat, and there is still a bunch of questions in here. So let's go with this one. Outcomes seem to be notified in June. Does that mean that funding the project could start mid-2020?
Mid-2020?
2022. Sorry, I'm living in the past.
That's okay.
The good old days of 2020.
Is this
2022?
well, January to March 2020. That was a good time.
Yeah, exactly.
So just to clarify, is the question around will I get money in my bank account in June 2020?
Exactly.
Great. Look, in all honesty, contracting does take a little bit of time, right? We're going to be funding a volume of projects, and then we get a contract to you, or a draft of that contract to you. We do recommend that you get it, you know, cited and looked at by, you know, a solicitor or a lawyer, just to make sure that your interests are represented. And, you know, it can take a number of weeks or even months to contract and then meet those conditions to get that first payment into your account. So I would bank on, if you are successful in early June or mid-June when you hear a result from us, I would give yourself at least 6 weeks for that money to hit your account once a contract has been executed, for safety's sake. And that's just me being transparent about the reality of, you know, two parties executing a contract, which is a lot of fun.
Excellent. Okay. We have an IP question here. So something we haven't really discussed yet. Amy is asking, we have some systems in our demo that we have developed that until now, we have not disclosed to anyone outside of the team. We plan on applying for IP for these systems. To confirm, are IP-related costs able to be covered with a portion of the grant? And then there is a second part of the question. Are these systems, they're at the core of our game design. So to showcase our demo, it would entail showcasing these systems. We are happy to showcase them, but we do have some questions. Is there any protocol during the assessment process that take into account IP and external non-disclosures for the security of the IP? And if so, what we need to note these particular systems somewhere in the application. So essentially 3 questions.
I'm going to take the last first, which I understand to be, are you going to keep my IP, my project, whatever, confidential? Yes. I would draw back to the fact that, Screen Australia assesses hundreds, if not thousands of applications every year, and make decisions on those projects and treat that IP with confidentiality, and our externals sign agreements to that effect as well. So I guess I'm asking you to trust us that we are going to treat that with the confidentiality that it deserves. And, as government employees, that's something we take very seriously. So, hopefully I can set your mind at ease there that, there's not any issues of leakage there. I wanted to use a better word than leakage, but here we are. Now, to go back to the earlier parts of the question, are we able to get funding for that IP? Is that kind of what we're talking about? That as wrapped up in part of all those systems that your own IP that maybe, I guess we'd want to, it's tricky to answer. We'd want to assess, are they wrapped up in the development of this game? And it feels like if they are, that would be eligible. I would probably want to know a bit more before giving you a definitive answer. I don't want to give you a straight yes or no on the spot and feel like that's wrong. I'm happy to have this chat offline and dig a bit deeper just so that I can understand fully what it is we're looking at. Because but I suspect that it's probably yes, because if it's part and parcel of the game that you're applying for, that's what we want to be funding.
Okay, great. Well, let's.
I'm sorry, I only answered 2 questions in there, so I might have missed a third.
Look, the third one was around the protocol during the assessment process that takes into account IP and external non-disclosure for the security of the IP. So, look, I think the second and the third question can be rolled into one.
Cool. Great.
And again, Amy, if that is unclear, by all means, reach out to Lee, and then we can discuss this in a bit more detail. Let's see what else is here. Are any small games considered for this fund? I have 2 projects I'm working on. One is a 15-minute long puzzle RPG, and the other one is a 3 to 4 hour long RPG. Would both or either of these qualify for? Are they eligible?
Sounds like it. Did you say small games? Sorry, Jens?
Yes,
was that the start of the question?
Games, in the sense that one of them is 15 minutes long, and the other one is 3 to 4 hours long.
Yeah, absolutely. As long as our eligibility criteria is met. As I said earlier, we want to fund a broad slate of games, and in that I include genre and audience and platform, length as well. That would also include price point. How is this being priced? Maybe it's a very attractive price to market to coincide with that length. So yes.
Okay, excellent. What about games that are planning to release with early access on Steam? Would they still be eligible?
If it's available to the public in a playable form, yeah. These are nice. Good ones.
Yeah, very straightforward. Just get to the more simple stuff, just to give you a bit of a breather. Is there a minimum level of funding for this grant? Hyper casual games are games too.
Yes, agreed. There's not, but being completely honest with you, the process and the workload involved with getting $15,000 out the door is very similar to getting $150,000 out the door. So I would say, keep that in mind. But yes, sometimes asking for less can certainly be more competitive. There isn't a minimum, but maybe there should be.
All right, here's another one. If a studio has a game which meets the criteria for the DGTO, but is planning another smaller project which doesn't, are they eligible to apply for the expansion pass for the smaller game? It's a double dip question again.
Yes, but we're only funding the smaller game is the question. And that I believe the answer is yes, because we're funding the game and not the studio. It may not be exactly the size studio we're aiming at in this initial round of funding, because it is aimed at small to medium-sized companies. But yes, I believe that would be eligible. Leaving myself some wiggle room there, but it sounds like it is.
Excellent. All right. Hold on. There was one here that was pretty straightforward as well. Well, I hope anyway. Famous last word. Is it expected that the game launch by the end of the year? Sorry. Is it expected that the game launch by the end of the funding, or can it stand over more than a year?
Yeah, we're not prescriptive on when the game launches. I think within reason would be what I would say, but certainly aware that every project is going to have a different timeline and different schedule. So I would just be, again, upfront about that in the application. This is when we expect to launch. We don't have a prescription on it needs to launch by X date or anything like that.
Okay, excellent. Just coming back to some budget, is there a reason / benefit to asking for less than your budget? For example, the budget is $200,000. Would asking for $100,000 or $150,000, would that help us succeed, or is it better to ask for the maximum?
This is going to be a frustrating answer for you. It's better to ask for what you need up to that threshold of 150,000. So yeah, some applications are more competitive with a smaller ask, but if it's in line with the scope and scale of a project, we do often fund at that full cap to recognize that. And also, in the scope of things, $150,000 isn't a huge amount of funding. If your budget is bigger than that, then as I said earlier, we're totally open to funding and being 100% of that finance plan.
Okay, excellent. All right, well, I'm just going to still go through this whole Q&A. I think we still have about 26 questions open. So also apologies if some of this has somewhat been covered before, but this one again revolves around eligibility. How does this fund work with indie games teams, such as a group of graduates that aim to produce a commercial game that currently doesn't have outside funding from a publisher? If the company is producing its first game, it doesn't have much money to work with outside of grants until the game sells. So it's again like, are we eligible? Where's the threshold? We're a bunch of graduates.
Yeah, as long as you're a company in this round of funding, yes. You don't need to have developed a game in order to be eligible. So it sounds like it's certainly eligible.
Okay, excellent. So if a project is early on and hasn't completed visual development / reached a vertical slice phase, will the submission be at a serious disadvantage? Because it's just not, doesn't give the impression of being super complete.
Yeah, and to be honest, we do want to be able to either play or see something. We do need to be. I would say this might be something for the second round in September, when it is in a further stage of development. But if we can't either play a demo or see a trailer, that's actually a requirement of the application.
Okay, excellent. Look, we're sort of getting to the tail end of this webinar, so I'm just going to have a look at some more questions here in the Q&A section with the 3 milestones set: contract signed, middle, and end. Does that mean a version 1.0 release on the desired platform, or can it be at an earlier stage of release? For example, alpha, beta, early access. So
delivery, as in the final milestone?
Yeah.
Yeah, that can be at a different stage of release, as long as the delivery requirements to Screen Australia are completed.
Okay, excellent. All right, now we have time for 1 or 2 more questions. What's the preferred format for the video pitch? Is this exclusively supposed to be a direct-to-camera pitch, or can it be perhaps a voiceover or narration over gameplay footage and graphics? In short, which one would you like to see?
Going to put it back on you, whatever works best, and totally open to either or any other possibilities that haven't been listed, because I said this at the top, so make sure if you haven't seen that, there's more detail there, but really your video pitch is your passion, your enthusiasm, your excitement for this project in whatever form that takes. And I encourage people to think creatively without spending money on a video pitch, because that is something that, that's often the first thing that we look at in an application and can be really telling and really grab us and excite us if you're excited. So yeah, whatever works.
All right, excellent. Look, there's one more question, and I guess that has been on the mind of the audience. Would there be a possibility to make the expansion pack initiative a permanent policy, or will it be around only for the next 2 years?
The ideal scenario is, yes, it would be an ongoing thing, but right now it is this round and then a rolling fund for the bulk of next financial year, and that's all that we can commit to at the moment. But I'm going to end on a really cheesy note, but hey, let's fund and release some great games together and really make it undeniable this fund has to stick around, because that would be my dream as well, that this fund is something that has a very long life and supports a lot of Australian game creators for many years to come.
Excellent. All right. Well, look, Lee, thank you so much. We still have a bunch of questions open. Like I said, we're more than happy to make ourselves available to answer those via email. The contact details are in the chat. Lee, thank you so much. That was very, very informative and very insightful. And thank you, huge thank you to the audience as well for your interest here in the webinar.
Yeah, sorry.
Yep.
Just in case, before people start leaving, what we wanted to say was, even though this live part of the webinar will be wrapping up at 5, what we thought that we'll do is, given that there are still a few questions that haven't been answered, we'll stick around in the live chat section. So we'll try to get through those questions. And anyone else here, if you also had other questions, feel free to just type them in and we'll respond to them in text. This webinar has been recorded, so it will be available. Also, the transcript of the text chat and the Q&As has also been recorded. So that will also be made available. So please stick around. I'll say we'll stick around for another 20 minutes. If that sounds okay to you, Lee and Tim. Sounds good, Lee?
That was the direct question for me. I was reading the Q&A. Yes, happy to do that.
Perfect. Then in that case, just to kind of wrap up this part of the webinar, thank you so much, Lee, and thank you, Tim. And also, we extend our appreciation to our great Auslan interpreters as well. Now, email addresses, what we'll do is we'll resend, Molly is just going to type in a couple of email addresses, games@screenaustralia.gov.au, if you want to reach out directly to Lee's team. And if for whatever reason you would also like to speak to Jens or myself at IGEA, you can just email us at jens@igea.net or ben@igea.net. And with that, thank you for joining us. And for those of you who will be applying for the fund, we wish you all the very best of luck, and goodbye. And to, I'm sure many of you will see you in the chat.